When we adopted Colby, we were told that he would need a really energetic household because, in the words of the rescue, it was impossible to wear him out. But because me and my husband spent every waking moment that we could walking in the countryside, we thought, we can handle this. And the rescue agreed that we'd be a good match for him. The emphasis was very much on more being more, and that he'd need every bit of activity that we could throw at him. Plus, I was still working under the age-old assumption that a tired dog is a happy dog, and that energy out and training in led to a calm and contented dog. It turns out I'd got things completely upside down. Stick around and find out what went wrong and how we turned things around. Hello canine loving companions, I'm Holly and this is Colby, the crazy Pouchon. And together we make a dream team trying to figure out this mad world of dog-human interaction, and we would love to have you along for the ride. As soon as Colby joined our little family, I began to implement a regime of games, movement and activity in an attempt to keep him occupied every waking moment. I'd been waiting 3 years to be a dog parent again. This was like heaven on earth to me, and to be honest, I probably got a little bit carried away. We went on walks every couple of hours, from epic explorations to little jaunts around the block, and each of these was punctuated with enrichment activities, play dates with other dogs, games, training sessions, play sessions, every kind of stimulation I could throw at him. Things were also unintentionally spiced up a bit by the number of cats and foxes that we seemed to run into on all of our nocturnal outings. So what happened was, gradually, I observed that rather than being exhausted and spending more time sleeping, the opposite thing happened. My little dog, who I was so desperate to keep happy, was spending less and less time settled and more time anxious, worried, and reacting to every little sound that met his ears with a reaction from his klaxon decibel bark, which is not ideal when you're living in a flat. I just did not understand what I was doing wrong. All I wanted was to raise a happy, well-balanced dog, and I was putting in huge amounts of effort to try and achieve this, but none of it seemed to be making any difference. I asked for advice on every dog training group Facebook had to offer, and I scoured the internet for answers until I happened to stumble across MK9 Plus Dog Training, which I've spoken about before, and I'm not affiliated with or sponsored by them in any way. But the magnificent Max Randall and his equally magnificent beard, he really does have some amazing information on his website, as well as a lot of really valuable free information on his Instagram feed and Facebook feed. So I would advise you to check that out. So I'd always believed that energy out and training in would solve any problem, because I'd failed to understand two vital things about dogs. The first being arousal levels, and the second being trigger stacking. So what is arousal? Arousal is a heightened state of excitement or agitation. Arousal can be caused by elevated stress, pain or fear, but it can also be caused by more positive forms of excitement, such as playing chase, playing with other dogs, chasing after a ball, seeing a squirrel, meeting up with friends and family that they don't happen to see very often. I'm sure you get the picture. Avoiding arousal is 100% impossible. You're always going to encounter stressful, scary and exciting situations. And anyway, we wouldn't really want to deprive our dogs of all those fun, exciting activities that they enjoy. So what do we do? Luckily, dogs have built-in mechanisms for dealing with this. They might implement sniffing, which lowers heart rate and pulse in a dog and helps them to regulate themselves, as we talked about in the last video. Sometimes you'll see a dog shaking off tension, but the main way that dogs process over arousal is through sleep. Good quality sleep. Good quality sleep is like a reset button for the brain, and it's absolutely fundamental in helping dogs maintain that base level in which they can cope with new experiences. This is one of the reasons that puppies and babies need so much sleep, because the world's completely new to them and they're encountering strange things every day, and sleep is what helps them to process their experiences. If a dog doesn't have the opportunity to rest or the inclination to rest, you get into a spiraling vicious cycle. The dog is hyper-aroused, so it can't sleep. And because it doesn't sleep, it becomes more aroused. And this is exactly what we were seeing with Colby. Colby was caught in this loop of trigger stacking. So what do I mean? He would encounter a squirrel and reach this level. Because he wasn't sleeping and because he wasn't getting enough rest, he wasn't able to reset to that base level. So he'd see the squirrel, he'd be up here. Then later in the day, he'd see a sheep. He'd meet some friends of ours at the pub. And because that base level was never going back down because he wasn't sleeping enough and getting the rest that he needed, that arousal level gets higher and higher. And instead of starting off at a sensible base level, rising and resetting, which is what happens with a healthy dog, he was just going up and up and up. And then we enter a stage of chronic stress and anxiety. And that's what we were seeing with Colby. This issue was compounded further by the fact that Colby was 10 months old. He still had a developing adolescent brain, and he still had those fear stages that occur during that, already keeping him in a more aroused state, and he just wasn't getting what he needed. So how much sleep does a dog need, I hear you cry? Well, ideally dogs are meant to sleep between 16 and 20 hours per day. Yes, you heard me right, between 16 and 20 hours per day. I don't know about you, but I'm slightly jealous of that. I do like my naps. So it was also at this point through finding MK9+ that I learned about day planning. And because my other niche interest is notebooks and journaling and stationery, this really piqued my interest. The idea of day planning is to keep a record of the things your dog encounters and how exciting that is and how much rest they get. But if your dog encountered a cat and then saw a herd of sheep and then had a game of fetch and then went to grandma's house, you can be pretty sure your dog is going to be in a pretty heightened state. So using that data, I was more aware of Colby's needs, and I could schedule in a decompression day or a couple of decompression days in order to let him naturally return to those base levels, so that the next time that he encountered something super scary or exciting, he was much more able to cope with that. Sometimes we plan to spend more time at home doing quiet enrichment. Through doing this, he was able to return to the beautiful little dog I adopted rather than resembling some unrecognisable hybrid of Dee Dee from Dexter's Lab, Harley Quinn and Stripe from Gremlins. I think I might have just outed myself as a Gen Xer, but never mind. So armed with these new skills, I began to implement my cunning plan little by little with just an old notebook. I jotted down our adventures, what had been happening. And on top of that, by using a simple time tracker app for my phone, I started logging how much sleep he was actually getting. And it soon became apparent that Colby was barely closing his eyes all day. I can't remember the exact amount of time he was sleeping, but it was nowhere near 16 to 20 hours a day. And so I started to cut back on the number of times in a day that I took Colby for a walk. And I replaced some of his more energetic walks with slow and sniffy walks. And we talked about sniffaries in the last video and how useful they are in helping your dog slow down and be calmer. And they're good for us as well. I also started introducing measures to help him to self-settle and sleep, because Colby's a very clever dog with a very active little brain and very sensitive little ears, and he does fight a bit against sleeping. I put several things in place to help him to sleep and to know when he was expected to sleep. And if you want to learn more about that, then please subscribe, because we're going to talk about sleep in the next episode. I won't lie, it was a challenge, but we made a little bit of progress every day. Sometimes it was one step forward and 2 steps back, but we were gradually, over time, making progress. And that was observable because we were measuring it. We were gradually able to reduce what had become chronic stress and was exhibiting as reactivity and anxiety. The poor little lad calmed down and was able to take exciting events in his stride much more easily, which was better for him and better for us. I still see a difference when he's overstimulated and tired, a bit like a grumpy toddler. And I know, okay, he's kicking off a bit. He's overtired, he's overstimulated. I can use that as a cue to reduce his activity and bring him back to an even keel by giving him a chance to decompress. So hopefully this will help you and your dog be more calm too. What's life with your dog like? Did you adopt a chill bit or a wild whirlwind of a dog? I'd love to know. Give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video and hit the subscribe button to learn more about simple ways to keep your dog happy. And on the next video, we will be talking a little more about sleep. And remember, so long as you're doing your best for your dog, you're doing everything that you need to do.